100% accurate CRM data is 100% clickbait. You can get pretty far, but not to 100%. But what I stand behind is that highly accurate, bespoke, and relevant data in your system of record is a decision. And it's maybe not as obvious, like when you just think about it, is your data in the best shape it can be? It probably won't. And the reason for that is that none of this is rocket science, but it's also very much non-trivial to get right. And I would argue that for most businesses, something like this is what you want your sales team to see. I always design these custom cards, and I'm going to go a little bit into what goes into, I always call it manufacturing that data, or producing that data is probably the better term. I always try to be hands-on with these things, but this is like the outcome of that. And it's not an outcome in terms of revenue closed. It's the foundation to even be able to get to a point of data-based decision-making. And this can look very different. The useful data is, this is really just one version of that. So when you look at that, you want your team to be able to click on the LinkedIn URL, and this should, first, it should be there, and second, it should lead to the right person. Sounds pretty obvious, but I'm going to show in the next few minutes just like what goes into getting that data. If it's not in the CRM, which is most of the time not the case, then something like this, and like this is just one flavor of this, right? But like, for example, when this says in seat, it is confirmed that this person, that this record, to be more precise, is correct, meaning this person is at this company at the moment. In the background, there's a metadata field when this was checked, which enables a routine that routinely checks on that, so the data can be trusted because it's accurate and current. And then we go further, and this is, I could go on and on about this, but like just this breakdown of like, okay, this is the title of the person, but what is their actual seniority and function? Because this is encoded in a title. And it might not even be in the title. Maybe it's somewhere on their LinkedIn profile. Data is much richer than there's more to it than meets the eye. I would speak about that at some point because it's a really interesting thing to crack. But it really produces this person is on a VP director level and their function is capital markets. For this instance, it's very valuable. It's also very valuable to know which metro area does somebody roll up to? Where could we meet this person? This is not that trivial as it looks like because you need to do the roll-ups. You need to have, here's a city, which metro area does this city belong to? You can build that yourself, you have AI created, but these things need to be manufactured along the way. So for example, because this contact has moved to this company and they were at a different company in the CRM, the team can, on this card, click on the predecessor CRM link and gets taken straight to this is where they were before in our CRM. And from there, it will actually lead to this record. Ideally, they don't have to click a lot back and forth, but it really enables that linkage between those records, which represent the same person. But you want to make that easy and accessible. And of course, the data we need from one record to the other is taken over, but I want to keep this brief. And in order to get to something like this, when you think about it, there is a bunch of steps that need to happen. This is what I wanted to show. In order to get fixing the CRM data, which we have here, which is basically what must happen to get there. So we need to know where they are now. Who are they? Who's them, right? So basically what that means in today's B2B, you need the LinkedIn URL of a person. And I call that the messy word problem because when you think about what is the data that you have on somebody when they are in your CRM, you don't have the LinkedIn URL yet, and you need it in order to know where is this person at the moment, and then you can fix it. You might probably have a name, first name, last name, email address. What that gives you is what is that person's name, maybe what's their title at a certain point in their life. And with the domain or with the email address, you get the domain and you get by that extension the company name. So there are many ways to go from this data to a LinkedIn URL. What I want to show is, because I was talking about coverage and accuracy, right? So when you think about what ways do I have to go from the data I have in the CRM to the LinkedIn URL, two major ways to do this. One is to take the email address and use a data provider and say, hey, data provider, here's an email address. Do you know this address? And can you give me a LinkedIn URL for this email? That is very quick to do. It takes like 2.5 seconds to spin that up. And the problem is it can be relatively expensive, but that's not even the main concern. It's actually usually not super accurate. You get a double-digit percentage of where it returns a LinkedIn URL, but it's in fact not the right URL. I'm not claiming I have like a big data view on that. It's just what I'm seeing in my day-to-day. Like in all of this pipeline that I have shown here of like identity resolution, then where are they now, and then fixing that data, this stuff, and this is why your CRM is not as great as it can be, because this is the hard part. I really like building these things in clay because the way my mind works, I will take these in the near future and have this as a perfect nailed down pipeline that I can just reuse and reuse and reuse. But like, imagine this would be not this foundational data point where it's always the same, but you can actually build that to your own very specific data in order to have like absolutely white glove, custom bespoke data that matters to you. But back to this, just talking about going from an input, email address and name to LinkedIn URL. So I blurred out all the names, of course, but we have the email domain with that, then we have the company domain, and then we can extract the name. Sometimes the email address isn't the full name. So ultimately, this all feeds into one agent. Two people can say the same thing, but it's vastly different data pipelines underneath. So what happens here? The agent finds actually a few more LinkedIn URLs than are mapped out in this column, but this is only because this column shows me LinkedIn URLs where the agent has high or very high confidence in the result. So if we have that, cool, I'll take that. If we don't find a LinkedIn URL with that, what I'm using is Clay's waterfall for finding LinkedIn URLs, which can be a little expensive, but it's also beautiful that you can just add it with a click and it goes from the data we have, email, maybe company name, to a LinkedIn URL. If we find it with this, and this is just one detail, I'm sending to the CRM with which method was the LinkedIn URL acquired, because if it is actually wrong, this way you can make data-informed decisions to make it better. And I do this in a quite manual way. You can do more of this with Claude Code, but I personally really like exploring and discovering and really getting through how does great look like for this. And then I'm going to bake it into just basically a markdown file that you can use in Claude Code, or for sure in the future in Clay. I have no inside knowledge, but they are not sitting on this. So this is not like in all eternity that you have to do these things manually. But it helps me really to understand how I'm building the data. And the next thing that happens here is we either have the first agent finding a LinkedIn URL or the lookup of the email. And if that doesn't help, there is a second agent that has, and I'm just quickly going to click into that because this is like something that's quite neat. I'm actually using Clay's Argon for this, which is 3 credits. Not cheap, but it's also actually really good. And this is like a LinkedIn identity resolution specialist. I'm going to get to how I build prompts, but this pushes really far what AI can do to find that. And the trick here is, for example, that it has the previous agent reasoning why it didn't find a LinkedIn URL. That is actually context for this agent. So it can look at, okay, can I try harder? Maybe it can avoid certain mistakes. And the prompt here is aware that it's going to receive that input data, which makes a different data pipeline than your run-of-the-mill go find LinkedIn URL for that. Again, there are two people say, I find you LinkedIn URLs, and it's vastly different things. This is how you get to high coverage, high accuracy. And the trick here is actually not to stop here, but to do a verification. Because now we have a LinkedIn URL. Again, it's blurred here, but these are the LinkedIn URLs we're finding. And you see these little white slots here, right? This is why I say you get to roughly 90% coverage. How do we get to knowing even how much of that is accurate? Honestly, there is no way of really knowing if you don't test it yourself. And I'm going to show how that looks like. But I'm not testing each domain. Like, I do this initially to see, am I directionally right? But the trick is actually to run a verification agent. So what happens here is that we look up the whole record in the CRM to get everything we know about this person. Maybe there's comments on that profile. And then we enrich the LinkedIn URL that was found. And this data is put into this profile match verdict agent, whatever you want to call that. And again, this is not a prompting session, but what this thing does is, hey, this is a LinkedIn URL I found. This is the data I know to be true. This is a different set of data, right? The data in the CRM I know is true. The LinkedIn URL I found might not be true. So this is what needs to be resolved. And this agent does this job. This is what it looks at. First name, last name, email address, company, all of this stuff. Like, what's the location? What's the city? What location do they have per the CRM? When I look at the enriched LinkedIn profile, if I found somebody who should live in Ohio, but I'm finding somebody who's like a teacher in Singapore, maybe it's not the right person. Maybe they just have the same name and a similar company name or whatever. And this is how you get to, okay, if this is an invalid profile URL, again, I'm talking about 90% coverage from 0 to 90%. This is where that drop-off comes from. It just can't be reasonably resolved, or it just can't be found, or maybe that person is not LinkedIn, whatever. You can't get to 100% in terms of coverage. But this is then all continued. This is then all continued, and only the LinkedIn URL which makes it through the verification is then actually sent into the CRM. And what you see here, like I know I'm stuffing a lot in that, but the beauty of when you have somebody manufacturing that data for you is actually, this is a markdown file. I'm developing these prompts that you have just seen, always with Claude Code. And there's a lot going into like how these prompts should be structured, there's this all meta prompting where I say, this is what I need, go build the prompt. But how that is built is like already a system that is developed over some time. Allows me to make that bespoke, because in a certain industry, you might want to do that verification differently. You might want to give it, hey, if two people have the same name, I'm looking for the person that's working in private equity, not for the person that is a teacher. And that is incredibly valuable to get to these outsized results. Should be combined with a process like this, where I basically build data, I produce data, and then we do a data review. And how that looks for something like this is really looking at the results of the verification agent and then actually going over 100 or 200 where we see the verification was correct, the verification was incorrect, and the actual result was correct. And all of this feeds back into the agent, making it better and making it, like, as I said, super bespoke and relevant to your market to arrive at something like this, really clean CRM data in your system. There's much more to this. This is why these things take a month and not a day. Like, into the future, this will be much faster with how everything accelerates. But I hope I could show a little bit, what does it mean to get to this? What does it entail? This was a tiny part, maybe 5% of the whole pipeline to make all of this work. But bottom line, it's a decision. It's not a result. You can decide to have this data in your CRM. Hope this was interesting. Thanks for watching. Peace.